Lately, Nintendo has been opening up about the Switch 2, the successor to the Nintendo Switch. From the shareholders meeting, we've learned that the plans for the full reveal for the Switch 2 have yet to change, so Nintendo has something in mind and they've yet to show their hand on how they're going to fully reveal this console. But as we also covered last night, Nintendo has confirmed that the Switch 2 will be backwards compatible with the Switch 1, and Switch Online accounts will transfer over as well. So huge news has been coming out, and it would appear that Nintendo has inadvertently revealed more about the Switch 2, and this has to do with the console's graphical capabilities, and it's pretty exciting. So that's what we're getting into this time on AndresRestart. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and let's get right into things here. So what's been going on is that we've had the Nintendo Switch Online Playtest Program. That game we can't really show off because Nintendo is keeping us extremely quiet about it. They will take down any footage shown of this game. But interestingly, WaterToon on Blue Sky has data mined the Playtest Program. And from this data, we can see two really interesting pieces of evidence here. One is support for 4K resolution, and another is support for mesh shaders. So when it comes to 4K support, this isn't the first time we've seen a data mine suggesting that 4K support was considered for a game. It's happened before, including Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door Remake, which has spurred speculation that perhaps Thousand Year Door at one point, and perhaps still so, will be somewhat of a cross-generation game, in the sense that Nintendo will update Thousand Year Door to have somewhat improved visuals to run better on Switch 2. But as some people have argued that just because we've seen 4K support within a data mine for a game, that does not necessarily confirm that this is a functionality that they were planning for Switch 2. Perhaps it's something they were simply working with during development to get more clarity while making the game. But us seeing support for mesh shaders is an entirely different beast. Quoting this article here, mesh shaders introduce a new compute-like geometry pipeline that enables developers to directly send batches of vertices and primitives to the rasterizer. These batches are often referred to as meshlets and consist of a small number of vertices and a list of triangles which reference the vertices. Or to put it more simply, as said from this article on PC Gamer, mesh shaders let game developers process polygons with far more power and control than old vertex shaders ever did. So this is a new way to process geometry, polygons, far more efficiently, and this will improve both performance and just overall detail in games. This is something that's been introduced in the middle of the Switch generation. It's something that the Switch cannot do, there is no support for it, so seeing mesh shader support in this data mine for the playtest program suggests that there is indeed some kind of version planned for Switch 2 as well, with improved visuals. And so there's actually a huge amount of implications from this. Firstly, mesh shaders are a relatively new thing that are being incorporated into modern games. There aren't many big AAA games out there that are fully taking advantage of this. One game that does come to mind is Alan Wake 2. So it does raise the question, could we see something like Alan Wake 2 come to Nintendo Switch 2? Perhaps. And if the Switch 2 is truly going to be having support for this is something that suggests the Switch 2 is going to be able to do a lot and hold up fairly well. This is going to be an advantage of being newer hardware being made with this processing technique in mind. This is something that could be leading to major Nintendo games being made with this in mind, and performance, better frame rates, and just overall improved detail across the board. It can make for some significant leaps here. But then going beyond that, if we're seeing this in the data mine, then it does strengthen the idea that this is absolutely for Switch 2, and it also has us thinking that that 4K support is also for Switch 2. Now, a lot of people don't like to think that 4K support is a reasonable expectation for Nintendo Switch 2 games. But what I also think a lot of people are not taking into account are the advantages of DLSS, something that Nvidia is likely incorporating into the Switch 2 hardware, deep learning super sampling. And this is going to facilitate a few major improvements. The most obvious is using AI to upscale resolution. The games will target a lower resolution, but then with DLSS, they will then hit a higher looking resolution. And because of this, 4K support is not as lofty as what some people are thinking. For Switch, it absolutely is to expect any sort of game to come close to running at 4K. But with Switch 2, that will be dramatically more powerful. They will have advantages of being modern hardware that will have mesh share support and also DLSS. Some games may run at 4K. I wouldn't be surprised if we see the next iteration of Smash Bros. Running at 4K. Let me point out that Smash Ultimate runs at 1080p 60. So it wouldn't shock me if the next Smash Bros. Is a game that runs at 4K 60. I'm not saying every game is going to run at 4K, but developers will have that option. Expecting the next 3D Zelda game to run at 4K might not be the safest expectation, especially if they also target 60 frames per second. But perhaps the Zelda team will have the choice to either go for performance or go for higher resolution. That's something we're going to have to wait and see on how it actually fully pans out. And before going forward here, let me just briefly ask that if you've gotten to this point and you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. But there is another huge implication here. The Playtest Program has been played on Nintendo Switch, and I fully expect that whatever this game fully amounts to, it will come out for Switch 1 owners. But seeing both 4K and mesh share support in the datamine for this game suggests that they do have a Switch 2 version in mind as well, and it then raises the question, okay, well what about other games we've seen datamines for where there were some things like this, like in the case of Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door? Are there going to be other games, recent games that have come out and will be coming out soon for Switch 1 that may also have a Switch 2 enhanced version? Be it a version that was made tangentially alongside the Switch 1 version, or just some enhancements they will add after the fact via a patch of some sort. It strengthens the argument for more cross-gen versions of games. I mean, we take a look at the recently announced Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. I always thought that we wouldn't see this until the Switch 2 era, because when you take a look at the Definitive Edition for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, it's a significant leap from the Nintendo Wii to the Nintendo Switch, a multi-generational leap. But going from the Wii U to the Nintendo Switch isn't even a full generation leap, it's much smaller. And while we have talked about improvements in the Definitive Edition as we showcased in our recent graphics comparison, the leap is clearly not as vast as it was for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, but could there also be a Switch 2 version that's being prepared as well? I think there's a pretty reasonable chance here. This is going to be a massive open world RPG that was a visual showcase on the Wii U, and to be honest, even on the Switch is still going to be a bit of that. So perhaps Nintendo may want to take better advantage of it on the Switch 2 as well. Possibly. And let's consider something here. Nintendo just confirmed that the Switch 2 will be backwards compatible with the Switch 1, and that also Nintendo Online accounts will transfer over as well. But they also talk about how there will be more details on backwards compatibility specified at a later date. So what would these details be? Is there some flexibility here in terms of what they mean by support? I would like to assume that what they're talking about is that we're going to be able to take our Switch 1 games, be it a cartridge or a digital download, and play it on your Switch 2 with saves carried over. Essentially, I imagine it working in the exact same way it works when you transfer over from one Switch to another. If you have an original Switch and then you buy a Switch OLED, you can still transfer over all your downloads, your cloud saves, or put in your cartridges. What Nintendo just announced, I think it basically suggests that, which we go into a little bit more detail on with my prior video. But perhaps it goes a bit beyond that when we start talking about Switch 1 games having Switch 2 versions, which we now have some mounting evidence for. Is it possible that as we transition over to the Switch 2 generation, Nintendo's going to be taking different steps to facilitate as smooth a transition as possible? This is something they literally discussed as they announced the backwards compatibility. They've talked about how they haven't had a smooth transitions from one generation to the next. But now, because of the current system with the Nintendo accounts, it's a lot easier for them to transition over. And if they have backwards compatibility, that's going to make a big difference as well. But then we take a look at the games we're playing throughout this year. Games like Mario and Luigi Brothership and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom that each have frame rate issues. There's a lot of conversation that maybe these games would run a lot better on Switch 2. And I'm not even necessarily talking about massive visual changes here, just a solid frame rate. Could there be a lot more games that are just going to run naturally a bit better on the console if they have an unlocked frame rate or if they have an unlocked resolution? Will these simply run towards the max more often on the Switch 2? Possibly, and that may be something that Nintendo could put out there for those that are buying Switch 1 games now. They may think, oh okay, I can still enjoy this in a better way on Switch 2 later on. I do at least think that it makes sense for Nintendo to have announced backwards compatibility at this point, as we are buying Switch 1 games for this holiday, because many of us are already aware that Switch 2 is around the corner and Nintendo is openly discussing it at this point. It makes sense for them to point out that hey, you're not wasting your money buying Switch 1 games now, they will be playable later on the new console. And so perhaps at some point Nintendo is going to detail all the elements of this backwards compatibility, how some Switch 1 games may just run a little bit better naturally on the console, how other games may just have straight up cross-gen versions, perhaps like Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, that may be treated somewhat like a Breath of the Wild situation, except in this case they focused on visual improvements. It's exciting to think about. I've already discussed in the past how Metroid Prime 4 Beyond may have a cross-gen version, and this version could look a lot better on the Switch 2. We've discussed the possibility of ray tracing support because we have heard about that from the Gamescom tech demos, that the Switch 2 is going to support ray reconstruction thanks to Nvidia's DLSS. And so you take that into consideration, then perhaps a version of Prime 4 that's been made with mesh shader support, perhaps they could output significantly improved visuals here. Will that be the case? I'm not sure. They've been developing this game for Switch 1 all this time, but we are seeing this playtest program, a Switch 1 game, with mesh shader support within the Datamine. So, the jury's out. Regardless though, we are seeing evidence of enhanced cross-gen support, however that shakes out, and different things the Switch 2 can do that the Switch 1 couldn't, that are going to facilitate vastly improved visuals and performance for the next generation of Nintendo. So that's all very exciting. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.